Hi, welcome to the Ask Dr. Khan show, where you're just one whiteboard away from solving your health puzzle. So today, we're going to continue our conversation around chronic inflammation and how that drives chronic illness and autoimmune disease. I'm Dr. Peter Khan, functional medicine practitioner, and in my online virtual practice, where I help thousands of clients throughout the past 10 years through video consultation, we run pre and post functional medicine lab testing to identify the root cause. And what I see most commonly in my patient population, those with chronic illness, chronic fatigue, chronic brain fog, autoimmune disease, thyroid problems, digestion problem, food sensitivity issues, is that there's this common denominator, and that common denominator is inflammation. Now, inflammation is a catchword that describes how your body is actually attempting to heal itself. So inflammation is not good or bad, it just is. It's a process your body has to go through in order to heal itself. If I twist my ankle or bang my elbow into the wall, it's going to swell up, it's going to hurt, a lot of blood's going to come to the area, and that is for the purpose of the healing that damaged tissue. If you have an infection, your body trying to get rid of the infection, you're going to have inflammation as a result of trying to resolve this infection and inflammation. So inflammation is. The problem with inflammation is that when you have chronic inflammation that does not resolve, then that can start to build up and start triggering chronic inflammation, chronic illness, tissue destruction, and eventually lead to autoimmune. So last week we talked about how that works. So again, let's do a quick review here. So here we have these cells called neutrophils. These are neutrophils. And this is a bacteria. And in response to a bacteria in your body, this is the vein, by the way. This is your vein, your blood vessel in red, and this is your lymphatic system. Your lymph vessels, okay? That's what this red vessel represents. So when you have a bacteria, your body will send out signals to trigger this neutrophil to come in through the blood vessel. So these are the same guys, looking a little larger here. And these inflammatory signals, due to this bacteria, will cause the neutrophil to come into the tissue from the blood. And you see the neutrophil inside are filled with these dots, these red dots. They're called granules. And they're enzymes. They're like the alien blood that's like super acidic. And what they do is these neutrophil will start to engulf this bacteria. So it's going to look like this. The neutrophil will engulf this bacteria, kind of like Pac-Man that eats it up. When it eats up this bacteria, it's going to inject these lysosomes or these enzymes into the bacteria. And when it does that, the bacteria basically breaks apart and dies. That's how your body kills a bacteria. With these neutrophil or specialized white blood cells, with the granules and the lysosomes, which are like really oxidative and enzymes that basically digest the bacteria. Now, once this neutrophil digests the bacteria, it's going to go through a programmed cell death. And that programmed cell death is called apoptosis. This is a very controlled mechanism. Your body has multiple gene regulators that control how fast this neutrophil that has eaten up this bacteria, how fast does it die, okay? Because once it eats up the bacteria, this cell will just neutralize the cell. That's how your body resolves this inflammation. Now, as this cell is going through apoptosis or programmed cell death, it holds itself together. It's programmed to hold itself together and not burst apart. There's a half-life to this, meaning it can hold itself together for only so long until it will eventually break apart. It'll degrade. So then the job is for the monocytes, which are these guys. They're called monocytes. Monocytes are these specialized white blood cells. They will come in from the chemical released by these neutrophils. So as the neutrophil is going through apoptosis, it's going to release these cytokines and chemicals to tell the monocytes to come in. It's going to trigger this thing. Okay? When the monocytes come in, monocytes will turn into macrophages. They will mature from this into this cell type called macrophage, and these macrophages are even bigger, they're really big cells. And what they're going to do, they're going to basically engulf this guy like Pac-Man. So the neutrophil eats up the bacteria, the macrophages are like the trash man pickup. They're going to come and eat up this whole thing, like so. And then once it eats it up, it's going to digest this whole thing. It's going to carry it out through the lymphatic system, and that's how your body resolves this. Now, in order for that to happen, you need these things called the resolvins. Okay, so there's an E series resolvin. And there's a D series, let's put it right here, D series resolvin. And these resolvins, and there's also these other type called protectins, and really they're called neuroprotectins and moresins. So these are different kind of compounds that are needed to get these monocytes, for one, to tell them to come in, and for two, to help them get rid of it. Now it turns out the E series resolvins is dependent on EPA, and the D series resolvin is dependent on DHA. And guess what? EPA, DHA is what's found in fish oil. Those are the essential fatty acid, EPA, DHA, that helps your body to trigger this process to resolve the inflammation. Okay? And so now you know why fish oil is so important in this inflammation immune process. In fact, this neuroprotectin that comes from DHA, part of this resolvin, is actually protectant of your brain cells. So that's why for people with neuroinflammation or brain inflammation from concussion, DHA is more preferred over EPA, although most fish oil have both, but certain fish oil products will have higher DHA, and DHA is more protective for the brain due to the neuroprotectants. So that's why fish oil is really important in the immune and chronic inflammation. Now remember I said that this process, this is normal process. This is what should happen. In functional medicine, we always have to consider different scenarios. What can happen if this doesn't go right, if it goes wrong? So if the macrophage is not able to clean up this apoptotic cell, then this complex of this neutrophil that has eaten up this bacteria will start to burst. The problem is that when it bursts, these enzymes that are so toxic that can digest bacteria will leak out of this neutrophil. When it does, it'll start to digest your own body protein. That causes more tissue damage and inflammation. And really what triggers the neutrophil to even come in the first place is tissue damage, infections. That's what causes the neutrophil to come in the first place. So if this cell that's supposed to be digested by this trash man, macrophage, doesn't get digested, these red dot or the enzyme or the acid that digests the bacteria will leak out, start to digest your own tissue. Guess what? When it starts to digest your own tissue, you have more tissue damage. And that's going to send more neutrophils to come in. And what happens is if the balance between the neutrophil and monocytes is out of balance, where you have so much more neutrophil, more than the amount of monocytes able to clean it up, right? You're throwing away so much trash, creating so much debris, faster than your body can clean it up. You're going to have an excess of debris, which means that more of this will spill out, which means it's going to promote more tissue damage and more inflammation, which will trigger more of these neutrophils to come in. It becomes a vicious cycle. The more inflammation, they get more inflammation. Now, if you throw on top of that someone who's deficient in fish oil, EPA, DHA, because the typical American diet is so much more omega-6 fatty acid, and not enough omega-3 fatty acid from fish oil, which help you resolve this, right? So that's why diet is so important. Then you're going to create a situation where you become chronically inflamed. Then you set the stage for chronic inflammatory conditions like arthritis and heart disease and so on and so forth. Okay? So this is a quick review of last week. Now this weekend, how does that relate to autoimmune disease? I want to link this to not just inflammation, but how does that relate to autoimmune disease? So remember, we had talked about this transcription factor called NfKb. NfKb, nuclear factor kappa B, is a nuclear transcription factor. Basically, it's a protein that are found inside your cells. And this protein is the final common pathway of inflammation in your cells, which means that whether it's infection, tissue damage, inflammation from autoimmune disease or inflammation from other sources, stress, anytime you have any kind of trigger for inflammation, eventually it's going to end up signaling to the cell. So here we have cell membrane. This is a cell. This is the nucleus of the cell, and this is the DNA material. Nuclear factor kappa B is a protein that when triggered by, and this will be a bacteria, could be a virus, infection, let's just say infection in general, inflammation, tissue damage, or pain. So that's why if you have chronic pain, this can cause problem as well. These are triggers, right, from your lifestyle, from your environment, that will trigger nuclear factor kappa B to go into your cell nucleus, literally to your DNA, and it's going to cause your body to start, your DNA to start to make different things through messenger RNA. It'll start to make these cytokines and chemokines, chemical messengers of the immune system. It's going to trigger your pro-inflammatory chemicals. And when it releases these chemicals, what's going to do is going to start to cause TNF alpha and IL-1 beta. So these are specific type of cytokines that will trigger the NfKb to further produce. So what we have here is called a self-amplifying cycle. You can call it vicious cycle if you want, but in the scientific literature, it's called a self-amplifying cycle, the NfKb self-amplifying cycle. I have made previous video that talk about this, but I just want to show you that this process is really how your body develops chronic inflammation and start to become potentially autoimmune. Okay? So what I'm saying to you is that this right here, these chemicals produced by the self-amplifying inflammatory cycle actually triggers more of this neutrophil to come into the blood, to come into the body, and then you get more neutrophil in the body, which you increase the speed at which you're creating cellular debris because your monocyte can only clear out so much. No matter how much fish oil you take, you can only clear out so much. So it's not just about taking fish oil or taking things to help speed up this process. It's also about not getting tissue damage or inflammation in the first place, which could be lifestyle change if you're sensitive to certain food. That's why it's a multiple factor thing. You got to work on the nutrition and the lifestyle. There's no supplement that's going to wipe away a poor lifestyle, a poor diet, a stressed out lifestyle. Supplement is not magic. Supplements to help. You can certainly be deficient in them. You still got to work on your lifestyle. So this diagram here is linked to this diagram, which I had previously talked about. Again, you can go back and watch previous episodes on them, but I want to help you connect the dot and make that connection between how inflammation can be related, can trigger other nucleus or cellular inflammatory response. So inflammation in your tissue can trigger a cellular inflammatory. This is happening in your tissue, right? In your muscle or in your joint or in your gut. This is happening inside your cell. And you start triggering the cellular inflammatory response. And the more of this you have, the more you trigger tissue inflammation response. And again, this becomes a vicious cycle in itself. And that creates problems. Now lastly, again, this is a big show right here. I'm leaving nothing behind. I'm giving it all to you here. What happens is we know that when you have autoimmune disease, that you have these NfKb nuclear factor kappa B that we talked about here, this activate STAT3. And STAT3 is a protein similar to nuclear factor kappa B. It's a protein that signals inflammation. And you see this arrow means that this triggers more of this and this triggers more of this. So they become co-activators. They activate themselves. They create this vicious cycle where the more of this type of inflammation you have, now you're triggering this pathway. Now what does this pathway do? This pathway causes these cells called the naive CD4 T cells. These naive CD4 T cells are cells that are like baby cells, right? They're trying to, based on the immune system response, based on infection, inflammation, based on information from your body, these naive cells are baby cells that are turned into other cells. It'll mature into what it's going to be. Kind of like, someone who's a kid, hey, what do you want to be when you grow up? I want to be an astronaut. I want to be an accountant. It doesn't know yet. It's naive. But once it gets some training and based on what the society needs, and this person might say, okay, I want to be an accountant because there's a need for it, whatever. So this naive T cell can actually end up becoming 7 different types of cells, different type of white blood cells, immune cells. And one of such white blood cell it can become, or immune cell, is called a T helper 17 cells. Again, I have made videos about this before, so hopefully if you've been watching me for a while, you heard about the Th17 cell. This is starting to help you connect the dots now, okay? So when you have autoimmune disease, I'm gonna say AI, this process is activated. So you become more and more inflamed. And this actually triggered the naive CD4 T cells to become these Th17 cells. And this is the cell that triggers the tissue destruction in autoimmune. So when you have rheumatoid arthritis and your joints being destroyed, and that's why you see the joint deformity in people with rheumatoid arthritis, it's the T helper 17 cells that are destroying the joint. When you have ankylosing spondylitis, you see the fusion and the damage to the tissue. This is what's doing it. When you have hashimotos, your glands being destroyed, the T helper 17 is partly what's responsible for that tissue destruction, the actual tissue destruction. So these cells, when they activate each other, is telling these guys to become this cell. So you get more of these guys, which is going to create more tissue destruction. And that's no bueno, because then things get bad. Now another thing that these Th17 cell does is that they actually destroy extracellular bacteria and fungi. Extracellular is the key. Okay? Because sometimes you can have bacteria that are attacking individual cells, but sometimes you can have bacteria that are outside of the cells. They just kind of set up shop somewhere. And where would these extracellular bacteria be? They live in hollow spaces. They can set up shop in hollow spaces. What are hollow spaces? Right here. This is a picture. You can see I'm a great artist. This is a face, right? The hollow spaces will be like your sinus. This will be your lung. This would be your bladder. So what happens is, if you have a sinus infection, or a lung infection, or bladder, I would add that gut. Your gut is a hollow space, right? Your intestinal lining is a tube that's empty on the inside. So if you have infection in your sinus, or you have a gut infection, you have UTI, bladder infection, these infections will cause increased level of Th17. So you get more of these guys, and their job, guess what, is to not only create that tissue destruction and kill the bacteria, but what they do is, look at this arrow right here, it's going to trigger more of these neutrophils to come in from the blood. And you know what happens, the rest of the story, is that you get these increased neutrophil, and then they're going to start to go through cell program death, and they're going to spill the content, which triggers more tissue damage and more inflammation if the monocytes, the macrophages, are not able to clean it up fast enough. But when you have so much of the neutrophil being released, you can't clear them out fast enough, you create this this vicious cycle of more neutrophil, which eventually more tissue damage is going to cause more of this thing from happening. And as this started to produce this cycle, this TNF alpha and IL-1 beta will trigger more neutrophil release because this is happening here as well. This is happening here when you have tissue damage inflammation. These are the chemicals that trigger neutrophil to come in. It happens over here as well. So you get this vicious cycle, and if you have an infection, then it's going to trigger this, which will trigger more of this. And that's why people don't get better. We're talking about chronic inflammation, chronic illness, and autoimmune disease. As your body creating more tissue damage, you have proteins that are damaged from your tissue, from your own body, being destroyed by your own immune system through this process. And these proteins, guess where they go? They end up eventually in your lymphatic system. As they go through the lymphatic system, they go to your lymph nodes. And these proteins, your own body protein, is presented to the T and B cells of your immune systems. These are the part of the immune system that recognize protein and say, is this a bad guy or is this a good guy? Now, if you see the body your own protein, it's supposed to let it go. Hey, you're safe. You're one of us. I'm going to leave you alone. But if your body continuously presents these proteins, and sometimes these proteins can be bound to other things like chemicals, like mercury or BPA, now the proteins start to look different. And then your immune system will say, wow, you look different. You must be a bad guy. I don't recognize you anymore. And that starts autoimmune disease. So you get tissue molecular mimicry, and you get autoimmune disease from this chronic tissue damage. So what I'm saying is chronic inflammation will lead to chronic tissue damage through all these different mechanisms that I just showed you. And that chronic tissue damage will start to send proteins out into your system. And if you're constantly seeing your own body protein, eventually your immune system may just say, you know what, I think you're just bad, and start to attack your own protein and start to attack these proteins where they are. So you get hashimotos, arthritis, Sjogren's, whatever autoimmune. This is why people have problems. So if you have a gut infection, gut dysbiosis, you constantly have gut bacteria problem, SIBO, or you don't have enough good bacteria, too much bad bacteria, or you have candida, or you have parasites, or you have a chronic virus you can't clear in your body, in your sinus, wherever. That's not good. That's going to present a constant trigger to this pathway here, which will lead to this, which leads to this, which leads to that, and we have a problem on our hand. So what's the solution? Number one, again, we talked about there's two sides to the coin. One is you want to reduce the amount of tissue damage by reducing the sources of that. This could be dietary. If you're sensitive to a specific food, you must cut out that food. Keep eating that food will continuously trigger this inflammation. If you have an infection, you need to identify it and you need to clear it. If you have chronic toxin exposure, you need to do detox to clear out these toxins. So that's on the reduction of the exposure to the things that can trigger inflammation. And on the other side, it's about balancing, so reducing the amount of inflammation that already is occurring. So we talked about fish oil, EPA, DHA. Now it turns out that turmeric or curcumin, which is a compound found in turmeric, can help dampen this step right here. So this is where we use a product called Potency. It's part of our de-inflame kit that we use to dampen this NfKb, because when we can dampen this self-amplifying cycle is slowed down. And not only does it work here, it works here as well to reduce the amount of neutrophil influx. Another thing that can be very important is D3 Pro 2000. Vitamin D is critical to help regulate these cycles. Another thing that's really important in this, I'm going to start to erase some things here, is glutathione synergy. Glutathione synergy is important to help dampen this NfKb self-amplifying loop. It's also serves as a really important antioxidant. Just remember, these EPA, DHA are fish oil, they're lipids, they're fats. If your body is really, really inflamed, what happens is sometimes you need this stuff to help get rid of this, resolve this inflammation, but if you're already really inflamed, this fish oil can oxidize. So if you're really inflamed, some of these fish oil can actually convert into a really bad form and actually cause more inflammation. So this is where antioxidants like glutathione, which contains not only 2 different types of glutathione, but also N-acetylcysteine, NAC, which is an amino acid that can serve as an antioxidant and help build glutathione reserves, can help you with this oxidation. This is my preferred source of antioxidation tool. Okay? So these are 3 things that we use really commonly. Don't forget the fish oil, and the product that we use for that is Omega Pure Pro. Or if you want the liquid form, we have the Omega Pure Lemon Cream, which is high amounts of DHA, EPA in a very absorbable form. So when we use these 4 products to help you resolve inflammation, this is how you help somebody with autoimmune. Not taking the hormone, not saying hormone's not necessary, but if you have inflammation, doesn't matter how much hormone you take, you still have inflammation. People jump to take something that they don't need instead of fixing the real problem. Now, of course, everyone's different. This is not a treatment or diagnosis. It does not replace you seeing me or seeing a qualified healthcare practitioner to actually run the right test, do the diagnostic, and figure out what the root cause is, and then treat, target with targeted specific therapy. And that's what we do in our practice. And if you need help, please call 480-988-6269, or you can schedule a 15-minute discovery call, and I'll put a link in the post so you can click and schedule a discovery call to speak to our team to see how our program can help you. And I look forward to helping you solve your health challenges. Please like and share this video, because I believe people need to know this information instead of just taking random things and doing taking random supplements and doing random things that doesn't solve their specific problem. So please like and share this video. You can also follow us on YouTube at Peter Khan DC, and I look forward to seeing you next week at the Ask Dr. Khan Show. Take care.